advertiser with a clear set of vested interests. Consumers are noticing. And the issue of whether native advertising is simply fundamentally grounded in a basic sense of a basic deception. It's one of the questions that we want to take up here in this panel. And where we are in the evolution of native advertising. We just saw in the last couple of weeks the FTC issued its first set of guidelines about it, and as we heard David Vladeck say earlier today, that really is preamble to regulation. So let me welcome Bob Garfield, columnist for Media Post, also co-host of Weekly on the Media from New York Public Radio. Bob has been a longtime columnist in a number of trade publications on advertising, one of probably the most read ad critics that we've ever had. Bob Garfield.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It is great to be here on Capitol Hill. I hope we get something accomplished today. And if we do, that will be more than the Congress has done for the last 10 years. In fairness, the Congress is dealing with highly polarized issues, and our subject is native advertising. Joining me today on my far left is Terry Seligman. She's the co-chair of the Advertising, Marketing, and Public Relations Group at the law firm Frankfurt, Kernet, Klein, and Seltz. Terry represents brands and agencies and ad tech stack companies, counseling them on legal compliance for their marketing practices and handling competitive advertising disputes. To my immediate left is Kevin Ryan. He is the CEO of Motivity. Prior to launching Motivity, Kevin founded Kinetic Results, the performance marketing firm. He was VP Global Content Director for Search Engine Watch and Search Engine Strategies, and VP of Interactive Media for IPG's Wallstrom Interactive. To my right, Asaf Hochman leads Global Product Marketing for Outbrain's Marketer Solutions. For the past 3 years, he's been helping brands around the world become better content marketers. Before joining Outbrain, Asaf was a digital strategist at TBWA, Publicis, and Gray, and he spent time on the client side at Red Bull and General Mills. And finally, to my far right is Dan Check, vice chairman of the Slate Group. Full disclosure here, one of my 37 or 38 employers. I can tell you, Dan Check writes small ones. He oversees non-editorial operations from sales to product and technology. He previously served as director of technology there, and before joining Slate, he created and managed a data warehouse containing records for all Americans for a company called Catalyst, that's misspelled Catalist, a political data vendor. Welcome to you all. Thank you. And I apologize for what happens next. I'm going to save us just a bit of time, every conversation about native always includes the questions, what is native anyway? Really, it's so broad. Are we talking about apples and oranges here? No. Let me please be allowed to put that to rest. We won't be discussing Kevin Search, which is probably the purest form of native, but it's basically uncontroversial and has nothing to do with publishing. So don't worry. Don't worry.
We do other types of work too. So it's, yeah.
Okay, so you can pipe up on that stuff, but believe me, you're going to play a role here. I've got it all planned out.
Well, if you want, I can just hold up a picture of breasts every 30 seconds and just say more like this. Is that's native?
Yeah, that's.
And Mom, if you're watching, happy birthday.
This is going to be fun. We're talking only about content provided with or for publishers that whatever its intrinsic quality is there to market a company, a brand, or a product. And that definition will embrace, for our purposes, everything from a 10,000-word feature on driverless cars, citing all the great experts in the world, a listicle of 24 celebrity bunions, number 17 will make you gasp, and absolutely everything in between. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about ethics, deception, and the recent FTC guidance. But I want to begin elsewhere. Dan, in a world where consumers don't click on banners ever, or even look at them, and often block them, native enjoys engagement rates that far outstrip traditional display. And publishers like Slate have embraced it to the tune of billions of dollars. Well, what I want to know is, before we get to talk about ethics and regulation, as a business and as a revenue stream for publishers, how scalable and sustainable it really is. Because compared to traditional advertising, which enjoys the virtue of having a near zero increase of marginal cost as volume expands, native, by its very bespoke nature, has a very high increased marginal cost with every new campaign. A lot of resources, a lot of money, a lot of staff time, and once you're done with it, it gets tossed out to start again. Which seems to me makes the margins very low, especially considered to traditional ads. And so you are suddenly, at Slate, you got into the content business, but really, to a large degree, you're in the agency business now. And that's not exactly passive income. If you weren't desperate for a revenue model, you and everybody else in publishing, if you were not desperate for a revenue model, would we even be on this stage today? Would you be having this conversation?
Wow. Look, so first, I don't think that we're desperate for a revenue model. I feel actually very good about where we are, and I feel good about the mix of income that we have. Obviously, we're going through a time of great upheaval and change in the media business. I mean, the truth is, with me, I've worked in the media business for about 5 years now, so all I've known is upheaval and change. So this seems like a totally normal clip to me, I think. And it does feel like a wave that we can ride and manage. I think what you have to look at if you're a publisher is you have to look at what your chief asset is. And your chief asset is your users' trust. At Slate, we spent 20 years building that up. As we're looking at these new revenue models, we're always looking for things that basically fit with who we are as a brand, where we think that we can create revenue and find a revenue stream without damaging that underlying asset. I mean, I've been at Slate for 5 years. I'll be at Slate for a long time from now, hopefully. And when I'm done, I'm going to pass it on to somebody else. I want it to be intact. I want the trust of our readers to be intact. That's really, really important. That's kind of job number one. And job number two is to make some money while we're at it, right? So ultimately, this is a way for us to do that, but it only works in the way, if we can figure out ways to do native. Like you're saying, you have to do this at a scale in terms of the individual buys where there is enough margin to carry us through and for it to be a meaningful part of our revenue. And we can get there. It means that we have to work with fewer clients, which is actually a good thing because it means we can be selective about who it is that we work with. It means that we can be selective about the kinds of campaigns that we put out and the kinds of messages that we put out, because even though this is produced in conjunction with an advertiser, we are an agency, and what gets published there really does reflect back on the brand to some extent. So we do have to be careful, I think, there. And ultimately the way in which we choose to do it and the way in which we found success with the brand advertisers that we work with, who are largely looking for awareness around the problems that they try to solve rather than the specific solutions to the problems that they offer, is that the pieces themselves, if it's for somebody who's selling retirement accounts, it'll be about saving for retirement rather than the specific products. It won't purport to be a specific review of their products. It'll be about the problem in general. That's something that doesn't really make sense for us to run as a publisher. The scale isn't there for us. The money isn't there for us. But if somebody wants to work with us to pay for that content to appear on the site, and that's something that's part of an awareness campaign that leads down a funnel that eventually, turns into people opening retirement accounts, it works and it fits along with like our overall brand. But ultimately, we want to keep the trust there.
That is a fabulous and comprehensive answer. And hold the thought about not wanting to do harm to the underlying brand. But as good an answer as that was, it wasn't one to the question I asked, which is...
I was hoping you wouldn't notice, Bob.
would you even be in the business if the rest of the ad model weren't broken?
Well, what business would we be putting ads on the site if we didn't need revenue for the site? I don't know. I mean, in some ways, you're arguing this hypothetical that involves media companies that don't need revenue streams. You have to balance this against other revenue streams, and one of the things that native really allows us to do is reduce the volume of advertising that's on our site. We've talked about the problems associated with ad blockers that we have today. Ultimately, as we see, some of those CPMs start to come down and the shift to programmatic, there are two ways that you can go. You can either retrench on a high-end experience with premium CPMs, which is what we're doing in the native space, or you can lard up the page with more and more ads and continue to chase scale and buy traffic, bring in the non-human traffic that we heard about in one of the panels before, have more and more pop-ups, popovers, higher ad density. Ultimately, that's the losing battle. That's the death spiral, right? I mean, so ultimately, what we need to do as a premium publisher is make sure that we're taking our premium, we're taking a premium magazine and we're finding a way to command premium CPMs. Today, native is the way to do that.
All right, I'll take that as a no. Asaf, I'm going to let you do an ad for Outbrain. In fact, I'm going to do it for you. Unlike the spoke content realm, that we were just discussing the costs that are attached to it, content recommendation segment, all those clickbait from around the web links, they cost the publisher zero resources, really. It's kind of like affiliate marketing. It's just free money, essentially infinite ROI. Am I correct?
Well, I'll have to counter the clickbaity ads. I think this industry, well, all of you use this, probably even today. And there are various levels of content throughout the net, throughout different content recommendations throughout sites. And it often derives from the publisher's, I wouldn't say greediness, but kind of where do they put their line. So yeah, I think, yeah, you're right. It's not endless, but as publishers want to monetize more, yes, they can choose to have content which is maybe of lower quality, or choose vendors which give them that content. I believe that publishers that work with Outbrain generally get quality content from mostly quality marketers, and might not monetize as much as they could if they really went towards financial scams, health scams, as we often see around the web.
Not to point any fingers or name any names, but all right. So just as a matter of disclosure, I have devoted my professional life from about 10 years ago onward to finding sustainable, ethical media revenue solutions for publishing. I don't think the society can live without its MTV or its entertainment, and I don't believe it can live without journalism. So I am utterly dedicated to finding answers to these very, very difficult structural problems. That said, and notwithstanding what you said about giving content that consumers like, the Federal Trade Commission, based on its recent guidelines, doesn't seem to like you very much. I don't like you very much. Not you personally, you're a swell guy, but your business, because of the inherent lie, which is that the implication that this is editorial content that you are clicking on because you want to see that 17th bunion. And has
More like this.
More like this, yeah. How do you sleep at night, Asaf? Tell me why your business doesn't fall outside the, within the parameters of the FTC's target.
Well, we have a lawyer. I'm not a law expert. I went through the FTC. I don't know it that well, but for the most part, we pretty much fit into most of the things they require. I think that you have 4 types of kind of methods you need to regulate yourself. One, you need to regulate, to disclose the recommendation widget as required. Outbrain invented 7-8 years ago from around the web. Looking back, I agree. It was a successful model. It wasn't a great disclosure, especially when we don't talk about organic, but we talk about sponsored. So we moved away from this about 2-3 years ago.
What does it say now on most publisher sites? More fucking advertising? How's it worded?
It says promoted stories.
Promoted stories.
Sometimes it's sponsored stories, but it's a way to better communicate that someone's paid for it. And we've run research, and consumers understand that this is advertising. I think consumers are more often confused by sponsored content they see on publishers' sites. I think publishers are still struggling to identify the correct disclosure. I think the latest research I've seen that 50% of readers have felt that they were deceived by publishers. So I think the whole industry is still trying to find the right disclosure. We're working with the IAB to really find the right spot. But I started with the four ways. So
that's a solid moral center.
Yeah, well,
that's true north right there.
It's publishers,
more like this.
It's publishers and marketers working together to find ways, to reach consumers without providing a bad experience.
Listen, obviously, you're living through just an absolutely quintessential example of media with an agenda. But understand that my bias is not against native advertising per se. I am biased, but it is not against native per se. It is about undisclosed or insufficiently disclosed native. You tell people you're advertising, and it's like, go crazy, and let them do with that information what they will. Now, of course, all the data suggests that once they know you're advertising, they will not ever go there. But nonetheless, if the consumer knows what the consumer is getting, I'm happy to see that 10,000 word on driver's list cars, or more like this. I don't care. The issue is disclosure, and that's why I want to ask, if you don't mind, I'm going to go past you, Kevin, and go to Terry. I asked all the panelists to give me a list of things that they want to address, and Terry asked the most trenchant question of all of these folks. Her question was essentially, and I can read it to you exactly, who cares? What are the stakes? Why is the government intervening in something where the stakes are so low? Quote, is clicking on something only to find out that it's not good content that you want to read or share, that is, it's a crappy ad, really the kind of consumer harm that federal regulators should be worried about? Now, I'm going to assume you think the answer to that question is no. That's a rhetorical question, but why is the answer to that no?
The answer is not necessarily no, but I realized I was starting to disagree with you from the moment you opened your mouth, and what I was disagreeing with was the notion.
I have a wife like that.
Yeah, well, okay.
If you guys need some time.
No. The notion that anything that a brand touches is necessarily advertising, I think, is an incorrect assumption. I think it is really important for consumers to know and for the government to have a hand in when there is a secret agenda and a company really is trying to push one and trying to sell a product in a stealth way. So, for example, in the email I sent, the notion that there would be an article that looks like it's an investigatory piece about the solar industry, and oh gee, it was written by Shell Oil. That's not something that that's a lack of transparency that probably could rise to the level of demanding a regulatory concern. But that Bunyan listicle. So, unless it is being placed by a podiatrist or Dr. Scholl's, You know, it might just be about, it could be actually a footwear company, you know, that doesn't do anything really related to bunions, but is very concerned with, you know, foot health. Is a journalist really going to do a better job with that listicle than necessarily some, you know, former journalist that's works for Federated and who the brand has hired to do? I don't know. And if a consumer, a reader, a consumer, I don't know how you want to look at it, but actually thinks that piece of content is engaging enough, interesting enough to post it on her own Facebook page.
So you're saying, if I understand this correctly, two things. One, the most recent thing you said was that if the content itself is intrinsically valuable, what difference does it make to the consumer to know its provenance, whether a third-party editorial reporter or editor who's put it together or a marketer who may be self-interested? What's the difference if the content should stand on its own? Yes. Okay, well, I can tell you that in every relationship that we have in business and the world, if you do not know what the other party's interests are, you are at a disadvantage. The government's job is to protect us, particularly in business, from being at such a disadvantage. Secondly, if the content is so intrinsically valuable anyway, why isn't Dr. Scholl's putting its brand name all the hell over it? Here's why. They know if they put their brand name or the word advertising over it, it will not be read. And therefore, they have to trick people into thinking it's content in order to get them to read the content. Now, no matter how great it is, I don't care if it's War and Peace, before the first word has been read, you have breached your trust with the reader, who thinks the source is one and not another. Now, Kevin, I know you have strong thoughts about this, and they're not necessarily in agreement with me, but haven't I just slam dunked my case against this notion that intrinsic quality of the content is all that matters?
Well, Bob, you're absolutely right. I'm feeling really good about braving the 10-degree weather to get on the train and come down here this morning. It was cold. It was cold. Yep.
How cold was it, Kevin?
Thank you. It was so cold my tauntaun froze before I got to the first marker. Anyway, so you've heard from the publisher, you've heard from the technology company, you've heard from the lawyer who represents these people.
Not these people.
Them, the they, the those, the them, they're there, the people. And you know, your point is, if it's an ad, if I know it's an ad, then I won't click on it, and that's kind of very old thinking. I mean, we date back. I hate to bring it back to search, but way back when ads started to appear in search, the man himself, Ralph Nader, wrote a letter to the FTC and said, "Do this, label them sponsored, or I'll say." Do it again, and those are the consequences. And they labeled everything sponsored. And year after year after year, there's one thing that we learned, is that people don't seem to give a shit. They still click on the search ads. Google is, they made a few bucks, I think. They did okay. Maybe they're doing all right. But it's plastered everywhere, all over the search ads. Sponsored, sponsored, sponsored. This is an ad. This isn't. One, people couldn't tell the difference. And I have no dog in this fight, and I'm not a fan of Outbrain. But they just couldn't tell. And they ask in study after study after study, what is this, a search ad or is this not a search ad? And people can't tell the difference between and dong 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 sponsored. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, but that means what the FTC says to that is, then that's not a good term. It means people aren't understanding it, and not that they don't care necessarily. At least that's a regular perspective.
Yeah, that's an argument actually for more disclosure, more regulation, more sanctioned language in the disclaimers.
And that's, I mean, we talked before, and I was watching the panel before about the self-regulatory model, and this is just something that's baked into the culture of Silicon Valley. Nobody ever asks if they should do something. It's what can we get away with and make some money, because it's just this rebellious, incestuous culture of we're going to do this until somebody tells us we can't. And that's pretty much how, I mean, we're gonna go out there and break all the rules. Watch the HBO series Silicon Valley, where they do the 30-second pitches, and every single company got up and said, we're going to change the world, and we're going to break all the rules. And so if you have this culture, we're going to break all the rules, how are you going to enforce the rules? It's super easy to just sue one company, fold them up, and put all their assets elsewhere, and just keep rolling it one right after another. How many times have we seen that happen in the tech world?
It's like the Oriental carpet business in some ways.
Going out of business.
Yeah. Well, let's just put aside regulation for a minute, okay? And let's just discuss what is nominally the whole subject of this day, the trust. Dan, I made an assertion, and I want to know if it's in fact something that is defensible. Can we agree that people don't want display advertising as we've always known it, that in a perfect world would underwrite Slate? I mean, that zero click-throughs and ad blocker deployments prove, not to mention the research and the opinion studies and so forth, that nobody with a beating heart ever consults display advertising with volition.
Yeah, I would have to disagree with that. And I think the reason why, I think that, look, what you see is that as things become commodified over time, as they become standard in their placement, as they become standard in the way in which they're displayed, you do see those engagement rates drop. And see that if you break out of the IAB standards, if you come up with new sorts of units, you do see engagement, you do see interaction. As you move into things targeted better, you actually start to see some better interaction. But the point of a lot of those banner campaigns isn't necessarily click. It can also be awareness. It can be other ways to drive to sort of drive a different behavior on down the line. Ultimately, people are finding value in that. Ultimately, brands are finding value in that. It helps them to achieve their goals of awareness. It helps them to drive. And they keep on sort of coming back for it. The challenge for us as publishers is to make sure that we're innovating in such a way that we're presenting people with things that they're not already fatigued of. And I think that you can do that without tricking people. In fact, I think it's imperative that you don't trick people. I think you can be honest with people about what that value exchange is. You can be honest about the fact that you're doing native advertising, and people can choose to click anyway, and people can choose to share anyway. That does happen. It's depressed. There are people depressed in the sense that it's different than an editorial headline. It definitely is. For the same piece of content, if you just stuck this is coming from a sponsor as opposed to not, it would get a much lower click through. People would probably read it in a different way. That's appropriate. That makes sense. There are people who are going to be receptive to the brand messages and people who aren't. There are going to be people who want to stay away and people who want to participate. That's sort of the nature of the thing. And our duty is really just to make sure that users are clear about that, I think, before the click. That's what our programs are about. That's what it is. That's our internal standard. It's one that's important to us.
I'm happy to say that I think Slate is one of the better actors out there. I think the New York Times really acquits itself very well in the marketplace. The list of people who do that, though, I think is very small, to tell you the truth. And even Slate, which, once again, I have a connection to, does not exactly put a big yellow flag that says advertising content, correct?
Well, yeah, we have a lot of discussions about this, right? Because we want it to be clearly labeled at the same time. What we want is we want it to be clear without it being like a warning, right? But we don't want it to appear radioactive. We want it to appear.
But it's not that, though, right? The label should be accurate as to what is actually being presented. So it's one thing to be very clear about the fact that there is a brand attached to that piece of content. They paid for it. They may have even actually been, would not have been written but for the fact that a brand paid some ad dollars for it. But is it an ad? Is it actually advertising if it does not promote the goods and services of the company or has some connection to it?
the way that we resolve that particular thing is not by reference to FTC guidelines or anything else. It's with reference to an edit side versus a business side. And if the advertiser is a part of the creation of the thing, if they have any sort of like pre-approval or whatever, that counts as being very deeply on one side, and it doesn't matter how deep that involvement is. And the stuff that is editorial content may carry with it, you know, sponsorship in the form of like banner ads or other things like that are 100% share of voice. But you know when you come to Slate and you see those sets of things that the advertiser played no role in the actual like approval of the thing or what the ideas were. Editorial worked on that independently, and that is a really, really important distinction to us. It's one that we take very, very seriously, and it is inviolable.
So you're asking about the trust relationship. You guys know this is an episode of South Park, right? I mean, you've seen the sponsored content episode of South Park. If you buy Bob's book and my book, send us your proof of purchase, and we'll send you a $1.99 coupon to download the episode. We're going to need to see that proof of purchase, though. So if you haven't seen the episode, Randy Marsh is sitting in bed trying to get the news. And he's on his mobile phone chasing it down. And every time he tries to read the article, he gets 17 ways of plastic surgery and more like this and from around the web. And he just has to chase the news. And it nets out in all the people in the town just starting to read the school newspaper because it's the only trust relationship left. So is it the content that's the problem, or is it the UX that's the problem? Is it 17 tracking cookies per square inch of page that the ad blocker may or may not be able to detect? Is it that relationship? Is it the trust relationship that's gone, or are we just like screwing the public so badly that they can't even tell what's content, what isn't, and my phone crashes every time I try to look at a website?
And by the way, you're paying for the bandwidth to crash your phone, and it's interfering with the content that you're trying to get to. So yeah, all of that stuff. I want to be on your panel next time. That's how I want to do this.
We can switch it up.
I want to, Terry, you asked a specific question. And again, it was the second most salient question that was posed by the folks on this panel. And you just restated it. If there's no direct sell in it, why does everything that has a marketer's fingerprints on it have to be declared an ad? I believe that the answer is because that is the definition of an ad, that it is paid for by a third party in one way or another to promote himself. In some ways, I think you've actually answered your own question. Why does indirectness or quality of the information or any other factor change the fundamental definition of what advertising is?
Okay, well, I mean, maybe this is partly definitional, and I don't want you to think that I'm taking the position that no disclosure is needed if a brand is touching it. Disclosure is needed. If it's something, if you think you're reading the New York Times, but you're actually reading a piece of content that's provided by a brand, you as a reader have the right to know that. But I think that's very different from saying that every piece of content, every communication that a brand has with readers and consumers and potential consumers is necessarily an advertisement. Because, you know, a tweet that is, you know, companies now like very much to engage in social media, and sometimes it's just sort of commenting on something happening in the world because they want to be part of the conversation. Is that tweet that's like, you know, commenting on some sporting event, is that an ad?
No, that's PR. If it's a sponsored tweet, it's an ad.
In other words, if they pay to promote their own tweet, that turns it into an ad. But if it's the tweet, the first tweet.
That's a new
But you're
category,
begging the
though.
question.
Are you talking about influencer marketing, where I
No,
pay
I'm
Justin
not.
Bieber
No,
like
no, no,
$50,000 to tweet about my
Well, no,
socks?
that
I
clearly
think
needs disclosure, right?
this gets to a whole different thing, though, which is that this traditional model of the editorial side on one side and then the business side of the house on the other side is just like totally ripped apart. I think across, like, you have this influencer model, you have this ability to promote promote tweets in the spot, but they're actually editorial tweets for like a positive story in the New York Times. One of the ways that we actually get some traffic from Outbrain is that we ran a piece about like a sweatshirt a long time ago that's a rave review of it. And so the sweatshirt company buys traffic from Outbrain to that piece of content. We get we get like whatever ads are served on the page, but nothing else happens. Is that a piece of marketing for that hoodie company? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. That isn't how we created it. We created it as
They didn't pay you to create it.
They
right?
didn't pay us to create it, and we don't get paid when they link to it except through very indirectly. I mean, it just feels like this. All of these walls are sort of like crashed down.
Well, let me
sorting
double
through the
down on
rubble.
that observation. Joe Rip, the CEO of Time Magazine, made reference to all of these different ways, these different channels for brands to communicate with people and fold that in, as you just did, with the changes in the fact that publications now have separate staffs to do advertorial, now called native, and so forth. And he made it seem as though that this whole business of separation of church and state is some quaint relic of a halcyon days gone by. Now, that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that it is an inviolable principle of journalistic independence and publishers' independence that is being sacrificed at the at the altar of financial need.
But is that...
Why is it quaint, this rule that the audience knows the motives, the provenance of the content, full stop, and that anything that obscures that relationship is an ethical violation? Why is that a relic?
I don't think it's a relic, but I'm not sure that I think that it's something that the Federal Trade Commission, who has particular jurisdiction and a particular concern with preventing consumer harm, not necessarily reader harm. And there's a difference, right? And if we're concerned, if the FTC's and regulators' concern is with or the purchasing decisions of consumers and those kinds of things that will affect them and being deceived in that decision making, is that really the realm for law and regulation, as opposed to publications doing their damnedest to make sure that they're following journalistic, long-standing ethical principles about what their publication should be.
Now, I know you're asking, does this rise to the level of the deception mandate that is at the heart of the FTC's existence, right? I know that's the question you asked, but it sounds suspiciously like what my wife said to the cop who came to our house investigating the supermarket parking lot hit and run that she was allegedly involved in. And she said, "Why aren't you terrorists instead of me?" Now, is that what you're saying? Are you saying the FTC has bigger fish to fry than whether publishers and advertisers and agencies are conspiring to deceive consumers?
No.
Okay, that's a good answer.
So that, I mean, isn't that the natural extension of syndicated content? In the example of the hoodie, the influencer marketing model is the next evolution of this outbrain mentality. In the hoodie example, the hoodie writer that wrote that story got $3,000. And he got his check to write that story. And in reality, because it's just the pricing for editorial is just zero at this point, so we probably got $8. He got a check for that. Now the brand is buying traffic into that article, and the publisher is getting paid for the traffic that comes into the site. Is that harm?
No, hold it. That article, this hypothetical one that Dan was talking about, was entirely editorially generated, and it happened to redound to the benefit of the brand, and the brand did what it could and paid to call further attention to the editorial article. And why? Because it was legitimate editorial, third-party, independent content that people trust. And that gets to the heart of why there's nothing wrong with that series of transactions. And from my perspective, everything wrong with undisclosed native, because it doesn't begin organically with independent editorial. It begins with something where the marketer has a dog in the fight.
Wait a minute, but Bob, you have been working in this industry long enough to know that lots of magazine articles from time immemorial appeared there because they was thought that they would be more appealing to advertisers.
True.
Reciprocal editorial content.
You heard it here first. The magazine industry for pretty close to 100 years has been a brothel. And it has been very, very difficult for the FTC, because of First Amendment issues, to find its way into that morass. But I don't think the fact that things were bad also in the old analog days is an excuse for further bad actors in the digital age. And I understand you are so right, but that's not an argument. That becomes Johnny smoked cigarettes behind the billboard too. Why am I in trouble? And Johnny isn't supposed to smoke cigarettes behind the billboard because he's only 11. He's only 11, ladies and gentlemen. Johnny shouldn't be smoking.
And I didn't mean to suggest that somebody got paid for that particular hoodie arc. It was more of a hypothetical. And here's 10 boxes of hoodies that they sent to the editors, and then they wrote an article about the hoodies. But all of these things happen.
It wouldn't. To Bob's point, he's totally right. It wouldn't work if it at the top of it said, like, sponsored by American Giant, or if that had come through in advance, if it had been written with an eye towards that, it would have failed as a thing. You would be reading sponsored content about how great the sponsor is. Like, that's going to ring false to everybody. That's gonna be such a blatant abuse of trust that it can't possibly stand. And I think that's the thing, is that when you're thinking about native, you have to think about content that's going to withstand the disclosure, and you have to be upfront about the disclosure.
So if I may, Dan,
Yes.
Asaf,
Yes.
what would happen to your business tomorrow if the wording like sponsored this and sponsored links and from around the web and all of those other circumlocutions were replaced by the words paid advertising?
No question. So when we changed phrasing 2 years ago from around the web to promoted stories, we expected engagement to go down and RPMs to go down, and we haven't seen it. So I guess people know what they're getting into by now. They're not
Nah, people are idiots. They don't know what they're getting. But the question is, does it matter?
You would imagine that if you clearly disclose it as an ad, people will be like, I don't want to interact with brands. But that's not, I think we need to distinguish.
What part of sponsored stories represents clear disclosure? It's just another way of not saying this is advertising.
I think we need to distinguish. Let's distinguish for a second between native advertising, the buzzword, and content marketing. And I think native is sometimes a questionable media strategy, but content marketing is the future of marketing, and readers and consumers do want to interact with brands through content, and we've seen it in surveys, and we see it every day. 80% of the world's biggest run without brand content. People click into their content. We see the post-click behavior. People want to consume content if it's valuable, and sometimes it comes from a brand.
I'm not saying I didn't gasp at that 17th bunion. I did. That's going to offer my questions for the panel. But I can see people, apoplectic on the floor. So Steve, John Bond.
Yes, hi, thanks. So I think there are some gray areas in this. I mean, the fashion magazines, I know people that advertise get those credits. That's not an ad. It is an ad. It doesn't say it's an ad. And in fact, September Vogue, the ads and the editorial are basically the same. Right? And women read it like it's editorial. So there is a gray area. And in fact, I think where not just advertising has always been, but social media and people that are doing native advertising well, the approach that's working is actually not advertising. It's basically editorial. They create, let's call it a magazine, and they talk about an issue that the consumer cares about, not about the product, because they're trying to create a relationship with the consumer, and the reason is, and they might not have the product at all. It might just be a way to engage. And the reason they do that is because if they talk about the product, the odds that that consumer is in market for that product, let's say for BMW, it's about 6%, I believe, when I worked on the account. So 94% of the time, they're not in the market for any car at all. So if you do content about something that's an issue, then you actually get more engagement, which is just what happens when we buy a magazine. We're buying content, and then we're putting our ad in that place, and that's what really works. So, and that's what earns the consumer's attention. So I don't think it's so black and white. And by the way, I think that good advertising has always been editorial. You don't start with a big logo. You know, all the best ads have always been interesting and about that, so you really earn people's attention. I don't believe regulation's necessary. I think people get what they deserve. They get punished by the consumer. Anyway, that's it.
I think we're getting two things that are kind of rolling up into something that, so this is content marketing is that giant umbrella, and then there's syndicated content, and then there's native advertising. Well, hang on, settle down, take it easy. Syndicated content is a really effective form of advertising. Native advertising is duping people into clicking on bullshit.
Or duping people into clicking on great stuff.
Or great shit.
The key word is duping.
Yeah, but wait, only native advertising isn't necessarily just branded content or editorials, right? It's like in-stream on mobile, right?
So when I look
when
at
it's
native,
not crashing your phone.
Well, I'm not thinking about native the same way you guys are. You're talking about native as a form of production, right? I'm talking about how it's given to me in my phone or on my computer, right?
That goes back to the UX discussion, yeah.
So, and beyond that, when I look at native advertising versus editorial content or branded content, it's all the same to me. Tell me what Red Bull is. Right. I mean, at the core.
That's disintermediated content marketing, right? Red Bull has said, I really don't need some third-party platform. I have stuff, I have a relationship with my users or potential users. I got stuff they're interested in. I'm going to take it directly to them. That, I mean, talk about spelling trouble for media, that's a whole other kettle of fish, but
So we work a lot
there's
with
no ethical issue surrounding it.
So we work a lot with Red Bull. They're a great partner. Actually, on the Red Bull side, you can see the Outbrain recommendation widget recommending more content on Red Bull. And they use us a lot to acquire new audiences from around the web, from Slate and other great sites. What fault do you see in that model?
That's the syndicated content model, right? That's taking existing content and running ads to go into that content. That's, to me, that's not native advertising.
Yeah, Red Bull's name's all over it anyway. No?
Actually, if I
There you go.
could offer a point of clarity. If I could offer a point of clarity here. There's nothing wrong with marketers being content publishers and representing themselves any way they want. It's a free marketplace. The rule is very clear. What it is if they're paying a third party, an editorial brand, to represent themselves as being organic content in that brand and not disclosing that, that is what's in violation of the FTC, and it's not disclosed. So brands using journalistic principles and leveraging journalistic practices is cool. Brands paying for journalists to represent them is not cool. But my question is, we started this day a little bit talking about meaningfulness and the meaningfulness of brands. And my thing is, I really believe that the issue here is that we're going to lose meaning very quickly. Because the reason why societies have rules, laws, demarcations, is to create meaning for the society. And my biggest concern is, whether it's regulated or not, if editorial brands, I'm directing this to you, Dan. Great. Succumb to this because they have a short con and a need to raise money, isn't the longer issue here that you're going to, as Bob has said, kill the golden goose, and nothing will have any meaning anymore, in which case you have no business.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly why you need those clear sets of disclosure and demarcation and all the rest. I mean, I think the deal is that as opposed to the in-house content marketing that's happening, you know, we really know how to reach. We reach 20 million people a month who are like really desirable as a demographic. We built an editorial operation around doing that. We have special insight inside of our building as to, you know, how it is that you reach out to people and connect with people like that. That's the knowledge that we really want to bring to the brands that work with us. We want to do that in a way that's clear and transparent to the readers, because you're right, this is, I mean, that's the chief value that we have, is the relationship with our readers. I mean, I started off by saying that. I think it's a fitting way to kind of close out as well. I mean, that is the chief value that we have, and it's something that we think about every time we look at the labeling around this, every time we look at, you know, how it is that we're doing the disclosure, how it is that we're doing the promotion, and we try to err on the side of caution. You know, again, because once you do that, you really can't unring that bell, I don't think. You know, when you lose a user's trust or a reader's trust, you're going to lose it for a really long period of time. We want to keep that trust. We want it to be intact through native advertising, whatever else happens.
I guess my question wasn't so much for Slate, it was for the practices overall. And my concern is, right now in the trade space, we're the only trade publisher we could figure out that does not accept native advertising. You can buy an op-ed in Ad Age, my old employer. I mean, they literally have a rate card for that.
Can I?
Go ahead.
Okay, well, I want to throw out, like, I love reading, clicking into sponsored content on Digiday from Twitter and reading it. And I love reading, like, this guy who runs this programmatic company has this 3 paragraphs to say that are probably totally meaningless, but, like, so be it. It's like, look, I just got that guy's point of view. That's good. That's perfect. That's all that I wanted. I don't think that Digiday's endorsing it. I don't think anything else is happening. I'm totally comfortable with that. And
You're not the average American consumer.
Well, and that's a trade publication too, right? I mean, if people who work in advertising.
Well, some people call it a trade publication.
Okay, I think
I refer to it more as
that's enough. That's
advertorial
enough.
in a box.
Don't let. We are not.
I don't have a dog in that
to
fight.
Besmirch our competitors.
He brought it up.
We are. That is not why we're here. Okay.
We have one more in back. Go ahead.
I don't have a dog in this fight, but I'm thinking through this as you're all talking, and the movie Ghostbusters. Look at the banks, and all the bankers have IMAX on their desk. It's called product placement. Native advertising is happening all around us. What's your,
Product placement.
He doesn't care about product placement.
Product placement doesn't necessarily, or probably doesn't give value to the viewer of the movie, right?
It actually does, but you could make an argument that it does, at least when it originated, before it became a catalog.
Maybe sometimes, but content marketing / native advertising very often does bring value. It's not just about the disclosure, it's about the experience you get after you click into it.
Hey guys, I'm going to use my moderator's prerogative to close with this one thought. And the thought is, I'm going to tell you about a country called Nauru. Anyone familiar with Nauru? Pardon me?
Bungee was invented there.
Bungee was invented in Nauru. That's the entire export of the Nauruan economy, except for one thing since World War II. After World War II, Nauru had the highest per capita gross domestic product in the world, by far. And yet, not a single Nauruan was employed, or hardly any. It was a total welfare state. All labor was done by migrant labor from Fiji, and that labor and the entire economy of Nauru, was to scrape the upper layer of phosphates off of the crust of this tiny Micronesian island and put it on barges and ship it for the phosphates they contained to the fertilizer industry around the world. And it was a magnificent thing for all Nauruans, because all they had to do was watch the steam shovels harvest the calcified bird shit, put it on barges, and off it went, and they got a check from the government every month. It was magnificent. The only problem was, ladies and gentlemen, eventually they ran out of bird shit. It had developed over eons, and eventually they scraped it all away. And now the per capita gross domestic product of Nauru is among the lowest in the world. It's not the goose laying the golden egg. It's selling off your only asset, let's just say phosphates or trust, until there is no more. And that is the stakes we're discussing today. I want to thank you very much for attending this session, for being here the whole day at The Reckoning. And I want to thank my panelists, Dan, Asaf, this guy, Kevin, and Terry. I apologize for absolutely everything. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks, guys. Thanks for rounding it out today. I want to thank, before we go, I want to thank our sponsor, Alight Analytics. Also remember, all is going to be online on demand. If you go back to the site for the, go back to the